Hello, you are with Dr. Sushma Singh. Today in Unit 10, Social and Human Development, let us start the lecture with topic Critical Evaluation of Human Development Approach. As we mentioned earlier, human development covers many dimensions of well-being, but for the purpose of focus and measurability and comparability, the Human Development Report team had focused on three important elements of human development: life expectancy or longevity, access to knowledge or literacy, and standard of living, which is largely measured in terms of income level with its purchasing power. The Human Development Index focuses on three above mentioned indicators. The reports however, that although the HDI is a useful concept, it is important to remember that the concept of human development is much broader and more complex than any summary measure can capture, even when supplemented by other indices. The HDI is not a comprehensive measure. It does not include important aspects of human development, notably the ability to participate in the decisions that affect one's life and to enjoy the respect of others in the community. The report adds that a person can be wealthy, educated, and healthy but not participating in the development processes that add to his or her well being. It is omissions like that these which have been highlighted in the early reports on human development. In 1991, prompted by these omissions, there was an attempt to come up with a Human Freedom Index and a Political Freedom Index in 1992. These measures were popular, but they were soon abandoned, which is a testament to the fact that such complex phenomena are very difficult to quantify. Though they have been difficult to capture as human development index, many reports have attempted not to undermine the issue by devoting several reports on aspects such as democracy, political freedom, multiculturalism, etc. The HDI measures average achievements in a country but does not capture the differences in each country. Two countries with the same average literacy level may have disparities between men and women. The Gender Related Development Index GDI, introduced in Human Development Report 1995, measures achievements in the same dimensions using the same indicators as the HDI, but captures inequalities in achievement between the men and women. It is simply that the HDI is adjusted downwards for gender inequality. The greater the gender disparity in basic human development, the lower is a country's GDI relative to its HDI. The countries with worst disparity between their GDI and HDI values are Saudi Arabia, Oman, Pakistan, Yemen, and India. Similarly, having a high GDP index does not necessarily rank you high on HDI index, as well-being is not just about income alone. Some countries have done a lot to distribute their income much more equitable and have strived to provide health facilities and education. Thus, a country like Bolivia, with a much lower GDP per capita than Guatemala, has achieved a higher HDI. because it has done more to translate that income into human development. The Human Development Report has been a welcome change and major critique of mainstream welfare economic and growth oriented measures of economic development, and to that extent it has brought about a human orientation to economics. The human development approach is not, however, without some lacuna. We address some of these shortcomings in this section and critically evaluate the report. Our vintage point of evaluation is largely from a sociological and social perspective. A detailed analysis has been done of this approach from economic point of view, to which we refer in a cursory way. Underlying the Human Development Reports are contributions of Amartya Sen and his close associate Mehboob ul Haq. The report was influenced greatly by concepts such as capabilities, which was introduced into the vocabulary of economics by Sen. He introduced the term capabilities to understand the multidimensional aspect of well-being in terms of choices people make for their capabilities. The concept of capabilities of choices attempt to identify what those choices may be. Included in some basic and valid choices are such elements as empowerment, equity, sustainability, membership in a community or group, and security. Various attempts were made to capture these elements in the series of reports, which were published over the years. The HDI, as a measure of relative achievements of various countries, remains the chief indicator of development, and as some critics like Afof have pointed out, that this measure only captures such items as longevity, education, and income, which only captures human capital and not choices that people make. Another point which was raised by Apthofi, who is an influential anthropological voice in development studies, is that the Global Human Development Report is dominated by economists and therefore remains an economist dominated world, though their plea has been to take it away from the pure economics to social dimensions. According to Apporthy, the Human in Development Report gives a good feeling, but it can divert attention from serious social and political analysis and hence from real understanding of human life. The social aggregates used are demographic trends and sectoral, and never about social institutions, social structures, or social groups' own categories. Besides these, the universalizing and global trends and categories do not reflect the differentiation within, and many times some of these categories are problematic. For instance, when we talk of freedom, we have to realize that what might be considered freedom by one set of people might be considered an oppression by others. For example, wearing a veil might be liberalizing for some women who want to escape from over-sexualized treatment of women in the West. In the human rights debates, there have been many such voices which have pointed out to this kind of universalization and how they do not necessarily represent communities and people's category. One of the charges leveled against the human categories in the human development approach is that they stem from a liberal position which talks about individual aspiration and rights and choices and not about the deeper levels of analysis. There have been criticisms that categories and terms do not have epistemological groundings. Anaya Mukherjee Reid, in her critiques of the Human Development Report of 2004 and its recommendation of multiculturalism, points out that while the report acknowledges the various symptoms of the problematic of multiculturalism, it refuses to acknowledge the silence of the underlying structures that generate those symptoms. Reid further adds, is anything really lost in speaking of issue and yet not of the phenomena that these issues comprise as a totality? I believe so. As Marine Fain, the feminist philosopher, explains with her metaphor of the bird cage, if one looks at the cage one wire at a time, then it is not quite clear how it might have the power to imprison a living being. If, however, one examines the case in its entirely, focusing on the specific pattern which connects the wire to make possible the imprisonment, then a different picture emerges. The problem is not simply one of omission, it gives the mistaken impression that the case is only a simple sum of wires and that liberty can be won by removing one wire at a time. She also says that this kind of understanding comes essential from a distributive paradigm of justice. She quotes Young to support her argument as thus: the focus on distribution ignores and tends to obscure the underlying structural institutional context within which those distributions take place. This context includes any structures or practices, the rules and norms which guide them, and the language and symbols that mediate social interaction within them. In institutions of state, family, and civil society, as well as the workplace, this emphasis on patterns of distribution is typically of liberal model of justice, which, as Marx pointed, frequently presuppose institutions of private property, wage labor, and credit, when these might come into question for a more critical conception of justice. Indeed, the precise goal of policy approaches premised on the liberal distributive model is to accommodate political demands within existing structures of property rights, gender relations, division of labor, and cultural norms. Now let us conclude the unit. There is no doubt that human development approach, with its attempts to bring about social dimension of development, is an improvement over the growth-oriented top-down approaches and models of development, which really try to understand that human beings are the ends in an effort to bring about development. In our first few sections of this unit, we have tried to see how this change was brought about through a series of debates and new approaches. This unit have been essentially devoted to understanding the human development. Since Human Development Report of UNDP are a basic crux of this approach, we have referred to the series of reports extensively. We try to follow the definitions and the problematics involved in trying to measure difficult and complex phenomena such as liberty, freedom, cultural rights, etc. While the efforts have been nobler on the part of the team which put together the various reports, the endeavor has largely been one of the bringing a human perspective to economics and not a serious epistemological critique of present practices of economics. This aspect has been brought out in our section on evaluation of these reports. Here we come to end of the lecture as well as the unit. Thanks for listening.